All right. Good morning, people. David Shapiro here. Today's podcast is a little bit kind of shooting from the hip. And it was inspired because I get sent, articles and blog posts and tweets and messages all the time of people trying to wrap their heads around post-labor economics. And this is not a criticism of people because this is complex. And it's great that people are engaging. However, there is one, let's say, frequent gap, common misunderstanding of one of the core concessions of post-labor economics. And so, just as a quick recap, the entire reason it's called post-labor economics is because labor, as we understand it, is going away as the central mechanism of distribution of wealth. So labor as it stands today is one of the primary ways that wealth is reallocated across society. And so you have what's called a labor market where you have, job seekers and and employers. So you have employees and employers. So you have job seekers and people hiring. And what you do in this market is you try and optimize your market value. So this is applying free market economics to the labor side of the economy rather than just the goods and services. And the idea is that it's a self-sorting machine where, due to rational self-interest, you are going to try and make sure that you make more money at your next job than you make at this job. That is how the whole thing works. Now, however, in the future, as artificial intelligence and robotics is on the up and coming, soon you will not be getting jobs. And we're already seeing people getting laid off because of, anticipation of automation, and sometimes it's actual automation. Now, this is, from an individual perspective, this is terrifying. On an individual level, it's like, wow, you're saying that I have no agency and no authority and there's nothing I can do. And that is my belief. That in the long run, over the next 10 to 15 years, there is pretty much jack diddly squat that anyone on an individual level can do to change this. And one of the reasons is you say, oh, well, what about jobs being created or jobs flowing to new areas? And there are growth areas. For sure, there are insane growth areas. The attention economy, the influencer market, the meaning economy, all of these things are growing, but they are not growing fast enough to absorb all of the labor refugees. In fact, they're growing about, depending on how you slice and dice the data, they're growing at about a third of the rate, a fifth of the rate, or a tenth of the rate as what they would need to be growing at to absorb all of the, developers and HR people that are going to get laid off. And so the math is very straightforward where you say, okay, if this trend continues, then within about 50 years, pretty much all jobs are going to be gone. And I mean all jobs, but the bulk of the layoffs are going to happen before 2040. And people don't like it when you say, hey, there's nothing you can do to ensure that you have a job. And this is one of the core concessions of post-labor economics. And it's one of the reasons that I've had a hard time running communities around this because, people have their anxiety and they're like, Dave, tell me what to do. And I'm like, there's literally nothing you can do. And they don't like that. So, people don't sign up for those communities where I tell them there's nothing you can do. You're up the creek without a paddle. In the long run, we have to have a collective action. So, however, when people start to dig into this, they start to say, oh, well, what if we look at supply and demand from a different perspective, right? What if we look at labor supply versus labor demand? Or what if we look at consumer demand? And what is the actual economic unit of a person? And this is the core trap, is people try to look at it as an individual problem. And so you say, well, what can we do as an individual? Okay, if I get sent a comment or a blog post or whatever, someone trying to wrap their head around, all right, there's nothing we can do individually to secure future employment, but what if there's other ways we can seek rent, right? They're like, well, what about our data? And it's like, your data is only worth about $300 a year. Sorry. And even if you create a data union and you double that or triple that, or even, multiply that by 10x, which that's not going to happen, by the way. Even if you could 10x your data rents, that's only $3,000 a year, which, by the way, anywhere in the Western world, that's like, 2 months of rent at most. So that's not going to cover your bills. That's not a replacement for wages from labor. And so, that's one of the kind of reactions that people have is, well, what do we have that we can monetize? What do we have that we can parlay into more economic power? And the point is, that's the point of post-labor, is there isn't. You can't. There are no options. So it's a fundamentally different paradigm. What we're looking at is a fundamentally different distribution system, a fundamentally different reallocation method of allocating wealth across the world. And so there's pre-distribution and redistribution are kind of the two paradigms moving forward. Now, the thing is that it is existentially terrifying for anyone, and this, again, no, I'm not finding any fault with anyone who thinks this way, but when you first come to terms with the fact that AI and robotics are on the rise, so the labor supply, right? Robots are going to be better, faster, cheaper, safer than humans. AI is going to be better, faster, cheaper, safer than humans. There's not going to be any skills left that humans have that are going to be valuable, at least in bulk, right? There's going to be a few edge cases here and there, but not everyone's going to be a PhD in rocket science, right? Not everyone's going to be a star comedian or, whatever else. And if you might say, oh, well, what if we all become influencers? By the way, I capture like 50,000 hours of attention per month, and that amortizes only to about $2,000 a month. And when you add the math, not everyone can capture 50,000 hours of attention per month. And I'm not even banking on that lasting forever, because guess what? As more and more people join the space, I get less and less time and attention. So it's a ruthless, ruthless competition. So even if you're a star in the attention economy, the attention economy is winners take most. The top 1 percentile takes more than 90% of the attention. So that's not, that's DOA as well. So that leaves us that the only solution is a massive systemic solution. It is a nationwide or planet-wide or whatever fundamental refactoring of the capitalist fabric of how society works. And that means that the problem is way, way, way harder. Because if you want to sit there and try and create a data union or a consumer co-op or whatever, it's not going to work, because let's just follow one of these threads. So the idea that I was just sent that inspired this was someone, again, proposed the idea of a consumer cooperative. And it's yes, this is something that I propose a little bit in my book that's forthcoming and in all my blog posts, which is, hey, if we consumers band together and create, cooperatives, then that can get us a little bit more off the top. We can purchase to own. But the thing is, if you don't have wages from labor income, if you don't have any income, then you don't have any purchasing power, which means you have no consumption power. So it's a self-referential paradox. And, this is why, again, I don't fault anyone for getting kind of stuck in this existential death spiral, because on an individual level, there is no solution. That's all there is to it. And so then you say, okay, well, what are the systemic solutions? And the systemic solutions are big and messy and unsure. They're being piloted all over the world in bits and pieces, but nothing so far has been put together that is compelling enough to say, hey, this will result in $60,000 a year of income per household or more, unless you literally take from the rich and give to the poor. And then you might say, oh, well, what about tax burdens? What about tax flight? And then you don't want to be wholly dependent on the government, which I agree with all of those. Are we going to raise the top marginal tax rate back up to 75% or 90% just to keep the economy going? That's not efficient. That flies in the face of pretty much all market orthodoxy. The reason that we have a labor market is because it's an efficiency-seeking superorganism. The reason that we have a free market economy around goods and services is because it's efficiency-seeking. And yes, I know that it doesn't apply to everything like healthcare and like utility scale. That's fine. But by and large, free market economics, when applied to labor markets and other kinds of markets, tends to be self-sorting. Now, the whole point, though, is that the labor market is going to just implode, because rather than hiring humans, companies are going to hire robots and AIs. And even if they subcontract out to another, someone else who owns the data center or who owns the robot, that's all going to be B2B transactions. That's not going to be B2C or, hiring a human. That's going to be B2B. But then, of course, if your customers ultimately don't have money, then your businesses are going to implode. So it's an existential threat to literally everyone. Nobody wins if the labor market collapses before we have a viable alternative or a viable, replacement or substitution, however you want to look at it. There's probably a better word, but we need to transition to something else. And this is the core conceit, is that there is nothing you can do on an individual basis. Like, if you happen to be a great comedian or musician, go all in on that, or if you happen to be great at, arts and crafts, and you can set up an Etsy store, that creates unique enough stuff that you can make a living on that, go for that. But not everyone will be able to do that, because again, if literally everyone on your street is doing the same thing, you're probably not going to outcompete them. And that's the name of the game, is that yes, there will be some work going around. There will be some demand for meaning and experience and attention, but that's winners take all, man. So that's not a long-term solution for everyone. And I don't want to spend my mental time and energy trying to soothe the anxiety of individuals, because it's like, yes, that sucks. I'm worried about it too. I'm right there with you. My YouTube channel has been slowly deflating because I'm not willing to do what it takes to keep up with the big guys who are just, systematizing and making everything a business. My YouTube channel is just an outlet for my research. I happen to be very lucky that it blew up, but I'm not trying to make a living from that. So I'm trying to find other stuff to do. And so then the final point then is that we need systemic level solutions. That means not even at the city level, not at the state or province, it's at the national level that we need to start implementing some of these solutions. Now, of course, universal basic income, this is one of the first kind of successful models. It hasn't been implemented at a national level. The biggest is that it's been implemented at least in terms of getting money in hand, is at the state level with the Alaska Permanent Fund. Now, that's not to say that there aren't nations out there that have sovereign wealth funds that fund the government, and so therefore people effectively get services, but that money never touches their bank account. That's not money that they're allowed to spend as they see fit, so that's still kind of distorting the market. That's the government saying, well, yes, we own the sovereign wealth fund, and we're going to be the ones to decide how to spend that money, not you. So we don't have any examples of state level UBI. We have plenty of examples of city level or county level UBI being piloted around. But then the question becomes, how do you fund it? Because the thing is, if one city or one county starts taxing very heavily to sponsor that, guess what? All the businesses and all the millionaires and all the billionaires go somewhere else. They go to another zip code. So, that's why some of these things really need to happen at a national level. And of course, the moment that you talk about that, you have the classical conservatives that are like, no, this is manglement, the government can't do anything. They're just going to make it worse. And that is historically well defended. Central management of the economy, or a centrally planned economy, is not good. At the same time, we don't have another viable alternative yet. And one of the things that I propose in all of my work is coming up with more market-based solutions, because that is the ideal outcome. However, when you try and look at modern MMT, so modern monetary theory, or labor theory value of money, those sorts of things, you might say, okay, well, what's the fundamental value of a human? Labor is the fundamental value of a human right now as far as the economy is concerned, and there's a lot of reasons that labor is a unique superpower. Labor is really important because, one, it's non-perishable, meaning you can't just store labor in a jar on the shelf. You have to pay someone in real time for their labor. The only exception there is intellectual property, where someone puts in labor to create something, some piece of information that is valuable, and then they maintain property rights to that. That's one difference. So, if you can patent a lot of stuff and then live off the royalties of patents, or, write a good book or some music. But again, the numbers there don't really add up for most people. So labor is perishable. It's also inalienable. So one of the other things is you cannot separate labor from a body, meaning as long as you can As long as you can refuse labor, you have some power, you have some skin in the game. But and not too long from now, labor strikes aren't going to mean anything. It's going to be like, okay, great, strike all you want. We're just going to have a robot come in and replace you, or we're going to have an AI agent come in and replace you, and you're never getting that job back. So the refusability or the inalienability is another superpower of labor. And historically, that has been one of the best ways for non-voting citizens or even voting citizens to coercively extract concessions from the state and from capitalists. However, all of those levers are going away. And again, I don't fault people for finding that existentially terrifying. That is the entire point. That is why I realize that post-labor economics is required, because it's not just a matter of distributing wealth. Because as many of you pointed out in the comments and other places, the moment that you don't have any leverage is the moment that you lose all power in at the negotiating table. You have no chips left other than to say, I'm a human and I deserve to live. And it's like, okay, well, what are you gonna give us in exchange for food and housing? It's like, well, I don't have anything that's valuable anymore. So that means we need a fundamentally different theory of human value. We need a fundamentally different approach to the state's relationship to citizens and voters and humans in general. And so you might say like, oh, well, the obvious solution is we all have intrinsic value, which is a great, fantastic philosophical stance. But how do you make a policy around that? You say, well, everyone deserves food and everyone deserves education and power. And it's like, great. How are you going to pay for it? Because I think that, when push comes to shove, most humans are generally pro-social. And they would say, yes, in an ideal world, we can feed and clothe everyone, and healthcare is free, and education is free for all, and everyone has a nice place to live, and so on and so forth. But then you have it's a wonderful sentiment, but then you have the cold hard numbers of how are you going to pay for that in a nation with over 300 million people here in America, or over 1 billion people in India. And on a planet with approaching I don't know where we're at. We're over 8 billion people total on planet Earth right now, I think. So that's a lot of humans to take care of. And if there is no market-based way of allocating wealth, then, or even generating wealth, if the wealth generation, if the vast majority of wealth creation is going to be done in data centers and by robotic hands, then unless you own that data center and unless you own that robot, you're going to miss out on it. And of course, that speaks to one of the directions, which is, well, why don't we socialize the ownership of data centers? Why don't we socialize the ownership of robots? And it's like that you can do that, but then the more decision makers you have, the harder decisions become. And so then it's like, well, is that really the most efficient way? And I don't think it is. So then it's like, well, what if you just tax the data centers? What if you just tax the robots? Again, that's great, but that still sets up the government as the middleman. And as I have established, and plenty of other people believe, market-based solutions are optimal. But the government is going to have to do something here. And you might say, well, the free market will sort itself out because if businesses don't have consumers, then the businesses cease to exist anyway. So it's rational self-interest for businesses to just give people money directly, which, I mean, some will. There's already cooperatives out there. There's already collectives out there. There's already employee-owned corporations out there that do profit-sharing models. Maybe that will become the standard. But every time I run the numbers are not good enough to say, yes, that is a neat and tidy solution that will pay for everyone's bills, and this will very clearly work. Now, there's the memes out there like, I'm about to be a member of the permanent underclass. That's the cyberpunk future, the high-tech low life of technofudalism, and you will own nothing and be happy. And that is the default path. I make no excuses. I make no sugarcoating, rose-colored lenses, kind of excuses around this to say, like, yes, as of right now, the default path is you will own nothing and be happy. Rents, a rentier economy with everyone rent seeking. And it's like, okay, but if if everyone is trying to, if everything's going to be a subscription model, but you don't have any money, then who's going to be able to pay for the subscriptions, right? That's what rent is. Rent is a subscription to your house and everything else. But without consumer demand, and consumer demand is your ability to pay for those goods and services, that collapses too. Now, of course, what I'm painting here is like the economic equivalent of like, P-Doom. But the good news is, so that's everything that I just laid out is like kind of the default path. The good news is that this is playing out in very slow motion. Now, that can be good and bad because it's slow motion, meaning that we have time to adapt. There's lots of information. There's lots of data. The numbers back it up. Kind of like, climate change. Climate change is a slow motion disaster. But the bad news, just like with climate change, is that it's so slow motion that people can kind of get lazy about it. They can forget about it. They can convince themselves, as things are right now is just never going to change and it'll be fine forever. That's the double-edged sword of a slow motion catastrophe, is that normalcy bias, right? Our brains are calibrated to think locally and geometrically, meaning if something doesn't change visibly on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, you kind of don't notice it. And this is something that's going to play out over the next 5 to 15 years. And that's fast enough that it could be very, very dangerous. It could be very catastrophic. But it's also slow enough that you're not really going to notice it. And so you kind of have a boiled frog syndrome. Now, of course, as someone who is one of the most vocal opponents of AI catastrophe, ASI is going to kill everyone, you might say, like, well, Dave, you're falling into the same exact, look at my reasoning chains. I've got impeccable, flawless reasoning chain, and my Bayesian priors say that this is what's going to happen. But the difference is that I look for evidence, real evidence out there in the data to say this is what's happening. And everyone from CEOs to chairman of the Fed, they're all saying the same things. Even the Pope has written tweets about how technology can have these impacts. So there's more growing consensus, and there's hard data and numbers to show that this is the direction that things are going, with reference to post-labor economics. Now, even people who disagree with the magnitude or speed agree directionally, generally speaking, that this is the direction things are going. It's just a question of how fast and how hard is it going to happen. But that still means that we need to solve the same problems, which is how do we pre-distribute and redistribute wealth in a future where labor is no longer the primary mechanism. So this rant, screed, whatever, diatribe might be leaving you a little kind of caught out in the cold. I'm not going to be, put it this way, I'm not going to be able to give you all of the solution in just 23 or 24 minutes, however long this is ultimately going to be. But the point is that this is a major oversight. Let's say oversight or gap in understanding that a lot of people have. And it's good that people are engaging. Like, that's the point of building a movement, is that you want people to engage and you want them to take it seriously. But when it comes down to it, there is no individual solutions. That's the long and short of it, is there is nothing you can do on an individual basis to solve this problem. This is a collective issue. This is a systemic level issue. All right, the end.